Good morning. My name is Lisa Weinstein. I'm the Vice President of TitlePLUS. Thank you all for coming, either in person or watching us online. We appreciate it. My presentation, as you can see, is on fraud and cybercrime, risk management, and claims prevention. Shauna wrote the paper that this is based on. Thank you, Shauna. And I'm doing the presentation. So first of all, I want to let you know that this is accredited for 1 hour of professionalism content. And I want to say that the paper is very comprehensive and there's no way I can cover all of that in the presentation. So for more information, refer to the paper. I've divided it up roughly into 6 sections, as you see here. Fraudulent checks, real estate fraud, cybercrime and phishing emails, fraudsters inside the firm, password best practices, and what to do when you're not sure if it's a fraud or not. So moving on to fraudulent checks. The whole idea of a fraudulent check scam is that somebody will look to retain your firm on a contrived legal matter of whatever kind so that the check can be deposited and the funds go into your trust account, and then they will insist that you provide them with funds out of that money from your trust account before the check can clear. And if it is a counterfeit or bogus check, then there will ultimately be a shortfall in your trust account. The fraudster walks away with good money. You'll never hear from them again, but you will be left with the shortfall. So very serious consequences, potentially. They will provide ID that looks real. None of us can judge. Some of it may have mistakes in it, but I would not rely on just that. If it looks real, I would not stop there. So beware of that. They're very sophisticated. We think organized crime may be behind some of it. And we just cannot tell by just eyeballing it whether it's a problem ID or not. So with respect to fraudulent checks, here are some examples. They're not confined to real estate. It's any excuse basically to get a large sum of money going through your trust account. For instance, if you're retained on a supposed purchase of equipment or inventory, funds will come in, or a check will come in, or a forged bank draft will come in, and it will be from a fake buyer, and they want you to put it in your trust account. Same thing. Business loan or debt collection fraud, same thing. Money is going to be sent to you. The debtor is going to be very cooperative. It's not usual. Most debtors don't pay up with just a letter. This one will, and the money goes into your trust account. Same thing. Divorce settlement frauds, same thing, or separation agreements. Employment law settlement, we saw one, an employment law lawyer did some litigation, made a settlement for their client. The funds came into their trust account. In that case, the lawyer's email was hacked, and the money was, and somebody purporting to be his client redirected the funds. He was not fooled, but in that case, it was something similar. But that wasn't a counterfeit check. This can be done by counterfeit check too. Or it could be a collection from an ex-spouse, and they're going to pay up pretty quickly, which is very unusual, as you know. Real estate deposit fraud, somebody is usually going to contact you, maybe from overseas, by email and say, look, I saw this on the MLS. I want to buy it. I'm going to send you my deposit. Will you act for me? The deposit will probably be substantial, and then suddenly they're going to find a really good reason why they need that money back, or some of it immediately, and they'll just say, take your fees out. Don't worry how much, or take a large amount for fees. Send me the rest. I've got to have it. Something urgent is happening here. And if you do it, the same problem results. So don't fall for that one. We've seen intellectual property rights fraud, where the fraudster is going to seek damages for breach of a trademark or copyright agreement, and the party supposedly in breach pays up right away, and the same thing happens. So those are just some examples. The forged ID is going to look real. The checks or drafts are going to probably look real. It may actually be a real check. It may come from a real company or individual, but have been fraudulently altered. These are very hard to spot. It might be drawn on a foreign institution, maybe American or overseas. It need not be, but if it is, the reason probably is that it's going to take a long time to clear, a longer time than if it was drawn on a Canadian bank. And you will certainly have fraudsters working in collaboration. It isn't even confined to just email contact. You may have people coming to your office and trying to do substantially the same thing, and that is also possibly a fraud. So if they're meeting with you in person or talking to you on the phone, that doesn't necessarily exclude fraud. So here is a partial list of the red flags of fraudulent check scams. If it is email communication, which often it is, you may see one or more of these red flags. The more you see, the more suspicious I would be. The initial contact email is just generically addressed, "Dear attorney" or "Dear lawyer," instead of your name. It can, however, easily be personalized, so don't rely on that. If you mouse over the email address in the from line, it may not be quite the same as you'd expect to see. The client is using a free email service, even though they're supposed to be a business entity, Gmail, MSN, Yahoo, for instance. The header may indicate the sender is not in the location they claim to be, but are sending from somewhere else. Don't click on the links or attachments, just move your mouse over the header. The client often will be new to you and your firm. They may be in a very distant jurisdiction. They may claim they like to use email only because of time zone issues or other legitimate sounding problems. They will be in a rush. This almost universally, they will say, "This is a rush, need this done quickly, I'll bring you more business. I'm not concerned about your fee, but turn this around quickly for me." And they're going to insist that you wire the funds out of your trust account as quickly as possible. Another red flag, and I lay stress on this because of the upcoming holidays. We're looking at a bunch of banking holidays. A lot of times they will want the matter completed on the Friday, say before the holiday, or whatever day falls before the holiday. Again, it will take longer to clear, longer for the bank to get back to you and say, "No, that one isn't good." So this is a very opportune time to warn about this kind of fraud. Financial red flags. The client will not be concerned about the amount of your fees, the amount of any, the cost of any mortgage broker or any other ancillary fees. They're not really paying it anyway. The debtor pays up right away if that's the kind of scam it is. Lawyers receive checks or bank drafts in their office in plain envelopes, no return address. Someone opens it, there's no letter in it, and they're like, "What is this about?" That is definitely a danger signal. Do not run straight to the bank and put that in your trust account. A lot of times we've seen that happen where the lawyer has been contacted but hasn't even responded yet, or maybe they've decided not to respond, which is a good decision, but it comes anyway. It may be drawn from the account of an entity or company that appears unrelated to where the email is coming from. The client is in a rush, wants it wired maybe offshore, and they aren't interested in your doing searches or due diligence, or they're directing funds to a third party that appears to be unrelated to the deal. Here's some due diligence you can do on the suspected fraudster if you're not sure. Don't use the phone numbers or email addresses that they supply. Verify it independently by searching online. Do reverse searches of phone numbers, locations. Google Street View can be very helpful in this way. I wouldn't rely on it 100%, but it can be useful. There was one fraud where the address given turned out to be a Comfort Inn. Confirm the branch transit number with your bank, and most importantly, if it's on a check, from a certain company, which it often is. They may have a very nice web page and in fact be a legitimate company, but it's not actually them that's involved. So call them and verify, is this part, are you meaning to make this payment? Do you know about this check? Is this check meant to be $500,000? Because instances are known where a check for $5 is skillfully altered to add some zeros. And that will tell you immediately, assuming you can get through to someone who will answer your questions. And the ultimate remedy, just hang on to that money and refuse to part with it until your bank has verified that, yes, it has cleared and the funds are good. And then you're good to go, and you know it's not a fraud. Endorsement 7 of the Law Pro E&O policy provides some protection for overdrafts in trust accounts as a result of counterfeit certified checks and bank drafts. There are some limitations and conditions on this, so read endorsement 7 very carefully, comply with it, or you will not have the coverage that's available in it. The frequently asked questions on the Law Pro website will answer more of your questions about that. I have a section here on real estate fraud, as you'd expect. First and foremost, the worst case, the worst kind, is identity theft fraud, fake personal ID, or, in an interesting twist, a fake corporate filing. We're seeing a lot of companies who own land and their identity is being appropriated. It's very easy to file a false Form 1, notice of change, changing the directors and officers of the company. It may be that the company has owned this land a long time. It may be vacant land. That is fairly common, need not be. But the fraudster will have a stolen ID of an individual, and they will see that the Form 1 is filed with that false, using that false name, and then they will go to a lawyer that has no dealings with this company, and they will say, I control this company, I want to mortgage this property, I want to sell this property. Properties that are targeted, don't assume these are the only categories, but these are some examples. Property that's free and clear of encumbrance, or just has a minor, maybe first mortgage on it, that's in good standing, lots of equity with the increased values. It's been owned maybe for a long time by the company. Maybe the company is controlled by elderly or vulnerable people or deceased people who have not got around to making the necessary filings. They are going to be in a hurry. As always, they don't care about an inspection or an appraisal. If we fall for this fraud, the client will vanish with the money. I have one slide here on corporate records fraud, which I was just talking about. Look for recent filings, relatively recent filings of changes of directors, officers, and registered office. They may not have a minute book, or they may have a minute book, which they can easily fabricate, and it may have mistakes in it. The resolutions may look unprofessional, or it could be perfect. I can't say that would always happen, but if there are some issues with it, doesn't look quite right to you, then ask some more questions. If you have any doubt, do corporate searches and see if there has been like a long history of regular filings made by someone, or maybe they're forgetting to make their filings and all of a sudden someone jumps in and changes the directors and officers. That is a real red flag. Okay, there is a link there to an article that we have up on our website, which gives some more details. Some more red flags. If you say, well, your previous lawyer may have some of these papers, can I contact them? And they won't permit it. If the person you're talking to is taking direction from someone else who appears to control what they're doing, like, oh, I can't answer that question, I have to call so-and-so, that is a bad sign. It could be at what we call a straw buyer fraud, meaning that the fraud mastermind, as we call them, has given somebody who needs money a few $1,000s and said, just go in and sign some papers, no problem, you won't be on the hook for anything, don't worry. So instances of that are known. Or you get one spouse or business partner and there's property with value that's that's owned by both, the partnership's breaking up, the marriage is breaking up, they're looking to mortgage the equity in the property before the other person finds out. They may have somebody impersonate the other spouse or business partner. Flip fraud. This is mostly in a rising market. It can be either a purchase or a refi. Somebody's going to claim to deal with a lot of real estate. They're going to promise good fees, lots of deals, and the idea is there's more than one fraudster involved, and the idea is to engage in a series of agreements of purchase and sale that aren't real third-party agreements, and at each step, the alleged value goes up and up and up to a point where it's inflated way beyond the real market value of that property, and then they will go to a lender and ask them to lend on that inflated value. Depending on the lender's level of due diligence, they may or may not catch it. And I should caution you that we're looking at a lot of private lender financing right now. That is a big increase that we've seen recently. There's still lots of institutional lending, but the private lenders are very active in this market, as you know, and they can be easier targets because big institutions may have tools in place. The private lenders may not be so careful if they see a chance to lend out their money at an attractive rate of interest on what they see as real estate that's secure. It's always going to increase in value. So these people or their companies may be targeted. So be even more careful when you're dealing with private lender deals. And I would say that for ID fraud as well. So that is the fraudster's object. As I said, usually there's an ID fraud involved as well, and they will just vanish with the mortgage funds. If it's a true flip fraud and there's no ID fraud, the lender will actually get a valid mortgage on the property, but it will be for far more than the property is worth. Sometimes they will target the worst property, the worst location, or the one in bad repair in a really good area, hoping the lender will infer the value from the area and the nearby properties, and not pay too much attention to this specific property, which really isn't worth as much. More red flags. If you're searching the title, always pull deleted instruments. And you see lots of activity recently. Now, obviously, there can be good reasons for this, but if there's quite a bit, you might want to look further into it before you proceed. Repeat activity on a single property or for a single person who may own several properties. Law saw one fraud where the person who owned it was a gentleman, and his son's name was the same name, only Junior, and Junior went out and mortgaged all his father's properties because the ID matched properly. So that was a scary one, although it was caught. So that's where there's multiple properties owned by the same person. If their ID is forged, they can be a target. Rental and vacant properties are very vulnerable. Rentals, because the fraudster may rent it and they may prepay several months' rent. It may be people own it who are going away to Florida for a few months. So they say, oh, well, that's disposed of now. But once the fraudster gets possession, they will list it for sale. Or they will pretend to be the registered owner, and they will look to mortgage it. And the lawyer who they go to will have no knowledge, and the ID will look really good. So if it's a rental property, look carefully. Vacant land is another easy target for obvious reasons. Nobody's watching it. If you have clients who own property that they don't occupy, or they do occupy it, but they're going away for several months, tell them to get a friend to check regularly on that property. With respect to the vacant land, the land that's targeted may be in very, very marketable and growing areas, but it may be subject to issues that really wouldn't be too obvious, especially to a private lender, like zoning, conservation of parts of it. That would restrict its value, but it would take a sophisticated real estate person to identify that issue. If you see a lot of frequent discharges of private mortgages on and off, or institutional, that may be a danger signal, or somebody's suddenly comes in and says, I've been referred to you by so-and-so, I can bring you lots of business, so let's do this. And if the person that referred them is, let's say, an agent that you know and you've worked with for a long time, that may be true, but the agent may also be a victim of the fraud. So it does come from them, but they've been fooled. More red flags. If there's no obvious reason why they would come to you, since the property is a long way away. If the deposit is not held by either the agent or the lawyer, maybe it doesn't exist. Targets properties with long-time owners, but I would not confine it to them. Amendments to the agreement of purchase and sale, reducing the price. Their object is to get the bank or whatever lender to lend based on that original price, but they're not really going to pay that price. The whole idea is that the fraudster doesn't put any money into this deal at all. The lender's going to be the only one putting money in. So if that happens and you see those amendments, you must advise the lender and seek their instructions whether to proceed. If you see unusual credits showing up on that statement of adjustments, or all of a sudden a big vendor take-back mortgage in a market where it's not normal, then I would start to ask questions. Or if before closing someone suddenly advises you, oh, you don't have to get this balance due on closing because I've just paid them directly. You better get very good evidence of that before you rely on it. That would be a big red flag. More red flags. Private agreements where there are no agents. Some of these are very legitimate. Some of them are not. The involvement of agents is a good sign rather than a bad, I would say. And they are at higher risk. And a lot of the institutional lenders have a lot of hedges around whether they'll lend on these deals. Maybe the municipality or utilities have no knowledge of the client's ownership. The client's not putting any money in. Counter checks instead of legitimate looking checks, or checks from some unrelated business entity. I didn't think anyone used counter checks anymore, but the other day I saw a fraud which had been flagged and identified where it was attempted, so I left it in the presentation. Just some tips from TitlePLUS and LawPro. Don't send documents out of your office for signing unless somebody from your firm goes with them and gets them signed and gets the ID off-site wherever the person is. Always include deleted instruments in your title search. If the ID that you're getting is an Ontario driver's license, here's a link. It's really cheap to do a search, and if there's some problem with the validity of that license, it will show up. I would caution you, though, that if it's a valid license that has been stolen, even if the search comes back okay, that would not be necessarily conclusive, but a really good thing to do, and it has turned up a number of bad IDs. So here we have the next section on cybercrime and phishing. Okay, so in general, this is a summary of how this fraud works. This is a little different from what I've been talking about, and it generally is done by email. And that somebody is going to hack into your system, or maybe if you've got good cybersecurity, maybe into your client's system. If your client is using a free email service or whatever they're using, they may not have the same security in place you do. They pretend to be your client or opposing counsel or a self-rep opposing party. And once they're in, and they've hacked into the email, they're going to watch, and when they see a legal matter, a real estate deal, or a collection, or whatever, that involves a lot of money, they're going to send an email looking like they're your client, and they're going to say, please direct the funds to this account, not that account. You receive that, the first thing you do, pick up the phone, call your client at the number that you have for them, and you say, did you send this email? And that way you will always know whether it's good or bad. I was just discussing this, and in a minute I'll discuss how they can get into your email in the first place. All kinds of people can have their email hacked. We've seen instances where it was the real estate agent, it could be the mortgage broker, anyone who's involved in the deal. It's always a good idea to mouse over the email address it's coming from, as it may be slightly different, maybe one digit or one letter different from what your client's email address actually is, and that could be a clue. In one instance, we had a lawyer call who got an email purporting to be from the real estate agent on the deal, asking for particulars of his trust account, and he sent a scanned copy of a blank trust check to this email address. Then realized he'd made a mistake, and in fact it wasn't the real estate agent. He talked to the real agent, they knew nothing of it, and he had to close his trust account very quickly and open up a new one. Damage was averted in that case, I'm pleased to advise. So this is what's actually going on behind it. The fraudster is spoofing an email address, posing as someone else, sends a fake email. It may not come to you, it may come to a staff member, and I can't stress enough how important it is not only to educate your lawyers, but also your staff, anyone who has access to your system, about what these kinds of scams look like, so that they will recognize them and not fall for them when they get them in their inbox. And these people may know that you're away from the office, your partner is away from the office, and they'll pretend to be you or your partner and say, please send the money here, there, and everywhere, and you want your staff to be aware that that may not be a legitimate email. So essentially, the redirection of funds at the last minute is typical of this. In a recent one, we saw the law firm's email account had been hacked. The client, this is a reverse, usually it's the client's email that's hacked. No, this time it was the law firm. They got a fake email from the firm asking for their deposit to be put in a different account. It looked real, the firm's letterhead looked good, but they'd added a fictional employee. So advise your clients that any instructions from you regarding funds transfer should be confirmed if they get it by email. And there is a story there up on the Avoid a Claim blog, which is maintained by LawPro, that you can read to get more details. That was October 5th, 2018. In this case, the fraud attempt was spotted. The firm changed their email and server passwords. Always consult an IT expert, though, about what you want to do in these situations. In the States, wire transfer fraud based on hacked email is an even bigger problem than it is here. And we're doing our very best to prevent it from becoming as bad here, especially in the context of lawyers and legal transactions. They will hijack people's email accounts. They direct unauthorized transfers of funds. The numbers are just huge that are reported, staggering. This source is the American Land Titles Association. We're a member, so we get this news. In many states, lawyers aren't heavily involved in the deals, but the title agent will be targeted. Also, in case you thought that fax was more secure, it isn't. This is an American example also, but no reason it couldn't happen here. The law firm had a fax account. They had an online provider. They got what purported to be a mortgage discharge statement and wiring instructions for the funds to discharge that mortgage. It was all bogus. And it turned out, I think the fax provider in this case had been hacked. It looked very real, and it was just scary. If you are curious, Google spoofed faxes, in quotes, you'll see how easy it is to do this. So make sure if you're using a fax service that it is secure and fully encrypted, and that you use proper passwords. So now, how do they get into that email in the first place? So this is called phishing and spear phishing. What they're doing is collecting confidential information and stealing it and getting into people's email looking to redirect funds. It's going to look legitimate. And if they're successful with this phishing, the next thing that happens is the fraud attempts that I've been describing to you. What we call spear phishing is when it looks even more legitimate and it appears to come from somebody in authority, For instance, a clerk receives an email that looks like it's coming from a partner in the firm, maybe that person is away, saying to send some funds here or send some funds there, or maybe asking for money. There will be links in it, or maybe an attachment. They shouldn't click the link and they shouldn't open the attachment. It really plays on human emotions, and so that's why staff have to be trained about it. Here are some examples. This is not confined to law firms. This is for the public, but good examples. They pretend to be the CRA or somebody else, threatening collection action or offering a refund. Offering money is very popular. People will click on that. Or they state your bank account has been compromised, or there's been a suspicious transaction, need you to verify your details. Obviously, don't put in those details. Or somebody purporting to be an IT provider says your system has been hacked or it looks vulnerable, let us help you, please enter some information here. A job site offers opportunities, asks for a resume. The resume contains confidential information, personal information. If you get something that you're not used to or it's unexpected from a source that may seem to be trusted or familiar, be very careful with it. Here's some more examples. Notice of an unexpected e-transfer of money. People like e-transfers of money, so these are a good one. If you're not expecting it, or your staff are not expecting it, then warn them it probably is not real. Or it may say, here's the attachment is something I promised to send you. Here's your invoice. Maybe your supplier's account has been hacked. Please confirm, please review, something that you gotta click on. So teach your staff not to click on these things if they're in any doubt whatsoever, and teach them the red flags. Characteristics, I think I've described most of these. Can also appear to come from relatives. You've probably received these already. I know I have. It purports to come from somebody you know, someone you've done business with in the past, asking for money or saying, oh, I'm overseas, I'm in trouble, please send me money. You get, people will impersonate, say, somebody's grandson and email them and say, oh, I need money, I'm in trouble, please help me, and it's not real. And people are aware that you're not in the office, or your partners, your colleagues are not in the office. People will post information on Facebook or Instagram of their vacation, and fraudsters are alert to that. They know that person's not working right now. They're not easy to contact, and they may be targeted for that reason. So if the person does fall for it, they'll be asked to maybe log into a fraudulent website with a username or password. They'll be asked for confidential information or passwords, or even if not, ransomware may be installed in the computer system, so they should not click at all. I was interested in the motives behind this. What is called is social engineering. That is a legitimate social science, actually. However, the Oxford Dictionary says, in the context of IS, information security, it means the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal info that can be used for fraudulent purposes. And the emails are targeting the people who have these emotions, which essentially is everybody: trust, hope, fear, greed, curiosity, laziness. We'll make it easy for you, we'll send you money, this is coming from higher up, you should comply with this request, etc., etc. So train people to spot them, and they will not be fooled. Here are some red flags: unusual URLs, different email domains, a familiar person suddenly sending you email from a different website, spelling and grammar mistakes, maybe or maybe not. A sense of urgency, usually that is a red flag. Anybody asking for money, even if you know who the person is, because it's probably not them. An odd salutation instead of your name, hello, Mr. Smith. Or they try to say you have a suspicious transaction, you need to log into this, your account has been hacked. payment in Bitcoin, that's not a good sign either. It may threaten that you owe money or you face criminal charges. It seeks to frighten by imposing a strict deadline. All kinds of things. So educate everyone in your firm, everybody that has access to your system. Even if people are not in the office right then, don't bypass approvals for urgent deals and funds transfers. Confidential information should be kept confidential. If there are last-minute changes on where money is going, be very, very suspicious until you know that you've actually spoken with your client. I have a little bit here on inside jobs where the fraudster is inside your law firm. These are usually very sad stories. It could be anyone. You may not know what's going on in their personal life. In one case, we had a trusted law clerk who had developed an online gambling addiction and was stealing money to feed that addiction. Nobody else in the firm knew about it. Here are some red flags. Somebody is an overachiever, won't delegate, won't take vacation or sick leave, works really long hours, or you get mail or contact for an unknown company that the firm knows nothing about, write-offs of work in progress, increased payments to some supplier for no reason that you can think of, changes on checks, double endorsed checks. So maintain spot audits within the firm. People will understand why you're doing this. Obviously monitor morale. Also change passwords if somebody leaves the firm, just in case they try to use the information they've got for fraudulent purposes. Create a culture of mentorship and collegiality. Use good passwords. They leave the firm, change the passwords, because you just never know. Moving on to password best practices. This is just a short overview, but don't share your passwords. Don't write them down. Don't save them on your hard drive. Don't use the word password. Don't put them in a document called passwords. Change them regularly. Never ever use the remember password feature that websites will offer you or your browser will offer you. If you think you may have been hacked, don't wait. Change your password right away. Use a password manager, that way you only have to remember one password. It's not foolproof, but it's a really good way of managing the risk. If two-factor authentication is available, then use it. The banks will use this. And what it generally will do is using a password in conjunction with a unique code that's texted to your cell phone and is only valid for a very short period of time. That is a very good way to protect yourself. It's not always available though. So if you have a transaction and you're not sure what you should do, there's lots of things that you can, lots of tools you can use. First of all, ask the client lots of questions. Make sure you contact them at your information, because if they send you information, they may have an accomplice waiting to take your call. We heard of one fraudster who had 9 cell phones in his car, and each one was attached to a fraudulent ID that they'd stolen. And it was like the names were taped to the cell phones so he could keep track of which one to pick up and who to pretend to be if one of them rang. Don't ever click on the links or attachments. Look for the red flags. Ask for help from other lawyers or other people who may have expertise in this area. Call the person who's supposed to have sent that email. Educate your staff. Also, we maintain the Avoid a Claim blog, which you're probably aware of already. This is a subset of the LawPro website. There is a search function. If we know that something is a fraud, we will put up the names of the companies or people that are being used. We may not get everything, so if it doesn't come up in there, then just Google the name or company that's being used. You'd be amazed. You put in those words in the search engine, and you get a bunch of hacks or hits from all over the world, where people all over the world have been targeted and are saying, this is a scam, this is a scam, don't be fooled. So that does help to alert people to a lot of these. And always have these fraud fact sheets on hand. They are available out at the front, but for those online, there's the cybercrime and bad check scams fraud fact sheet, and then there's the real estate fraud fact sheet. This real estate one is brand new, just updated. The red flags and everything are in here. So very useful things to have. You can download them and print them off of the Law Pro website. Ultimately, if you're not sure, then decline to act. Don't get involved, don't respond, or just respond and saying not interested, sorry, or whatever, and you can't be fooled that way. Here's the Avoid a Claim blog. That's what it looks like. You can subscribe every time the name of a new fraudster is put up there. You will get an email warning you about it. If you're sure something is a fraud, please consider reporting it to us. We have a fraud reporting email address there, or you can also call us. Of course, you'll be put through to a member of the fraud team. And we'll try, if you're not sure, we'll try to help you figure out if it really is a fraud. We've got a lot of experience in identifying these. So, and that's what this slide says, essentially. Or if you don't have time for this, then simply decline to act, and that will be the end of it. Bottom line, if it looks or sounds too easy or too good to be true, probably is. Thank you very much. Questions? The question that I've received is, says, to prevent lawyers from being defrauded on counterfeit checks, can there be a stop on asking the seller's lawyer to receive all the closing funds and be responsible to issue checks from the trust account to pay the client and the client's mortgages after the sale transaction is completed? The seller's lawyer takes the risk that the closing fund check deposited from the buyer in the trust account is not good. This is a suggestion that I think might be more appropriate to be made to the Law Society, as the Law Pro does not govern the rules of professional conduct. And I think this kind of thing has to be taken into account. But unfortunately, there's not a lot that Law Pro by itself can do to address these things that are common practice. Are there any more questions? Okay, the question is, I understood that the Law Society rules required that lawyers receive certified funds in trust at least 8 business days before having to disperse them, or alternatively get phone or fax authorization from the issuing financial institution, authentication, as to the authenticity of the check. We always request a banker's business card from our client with their certified funds, and we fax the banker and ask them to confirm they issued the funds instrument. Well, that is a good practice. I think I'm not positive on this. The 8 business days is referred to in endorsement 7, which is the counterfeit check coverage on the Law Pro policy. I'm not aware of it in the Law Society rules. I know that this is not always practical in real estate deals. The only comment that I can make is be very, very careful what kind of money you deposit into your trust account, and arrange a postponement if you're in any doubt. I know that's not the best answer in the world, but it's 8 business days. To hold the funds 8 business days in real estate, often it's not practical. And I have to agree with the person who submitted this. Thanks. The question is, in a real estate closing, when the opposing side sends funds to your trust account at 4:45 p.m. and informs you that the closing funds are paid and please release the transfer, I did not have time to check if the funds are good. If I don't close, I'll be blamed for not closing. I do agree with this comment, but it's a similar answer to what I gave to the first question, is that I'm not, Law Pro is not in a position to regulate the way real estate transactions are carried out. So that's why it's so important to be aware of the red flags of fraud. I wish I could give you a better answer. Anything else? More questions? Yes, yes.
So with respect to endorsement, I think it's endorsement 7 that you mentioned.
Yes.
That was introduced in 2010. If Lopra understands that it's not practical to hold on to money for a certain period of time, or in these days you can't even get confirmation from the bank of other funds, why not change the endorsement? You know, if you understand the practicality, especially in real estate. I think it's a matter of limiting the risk that the program takes on so that the premium can be kept to a reasonable amount, and it's the risk exposure they're worried about in imposing these limitations, which is something that affects the whole profession. I have another question here. Is it true that if you have confirmation that the closing funds are from the other lawyer's trust account, you are okay to close and disperse the next day to pay a mortgage? I would say there would not be an assurance in that case, unless the lawyer, if you spoke to the lawyer and the lawyer verified that he or she had confirmed the funds were good, then it would be okay, or it would be safe anyway. And then he says, once an email money transfer is in the account, can you treat it as cleared? It's my understanding that wire transfers are not subject to a delay in clearing because they're under the large value transfer system. But an email money transfer, I'm not sure about that, so I hesitate to say that you could treat it as cleared funds. More questions?
I'll read it to you.
Okay.
In the sale transaction, I knew the buyer's lawyer is going to deposit funds into my account.
Sorry, do you mind going into my flash just for the online audio today?
Sure. Which one?
Just
At the front?
Yeah. In a sale transaction, I knew the buyer's lawyer is going to deposit funds into my account. It was transferred at 4:55 p.m. I contacted my branch manager to ask if this type of funds transfer is good funds. She asked me to wait. Half an hour after, her staff called to tell me the funds are now good. I saw the money in my trust account half an hour earlier, but it was not good until someone at the bank did something before I knew it was good. What if I can't reach the branch manager? I think this is the same question as I've already referred to, and I can't offer any assurance on this unless it was a wire transfer of funds. I just can't offer any more illumination on this. Are there any more questions? There are lots of weaknesses in our financial system, and we need a little bit of, we need more regulation maybe around the transfer of funds, what's acceptable and what is not. I understand Payments Canada is working on a project to change up the funds transfer systems that are available. I'm not aware that anything has been launched yet. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you online, and
Thanks for coming to our Title Plus presentations, and we hope to do this again early in next year. Thank you.